at any point you're having difficulty understanding what I'm saying because of the accent or the speed at which I'm talking, just wave at me and tell me to slow down. So, this workshop, this presentation is going to be on the topic of identifying and training fundamental skills. This is something that I'm quite interested in. I'm also interested in the complex stuff. Complex stuff is a lot of fun, but I find you can get more success with the complex fun things, and it'll be more fun by paying attention to the very basics. So it's a very, very brief introduction. My main discipline is longswords, mainly the 15th century stuff from the Lichner tradition. I also study lots of other disciplines as well. So this is not going to be, drawn primarily from just longsword research. I do a ton of other stuff: sabre, broadsword, bayonet, bit of small sword, some messer. Anything with a blade is really interesting. I will give my case studies mainly from the point of view of longsword, since that's what I do most often, and it's where I find things tend to be most complex, at least from my understanding of things. But the material within this presentation is equally applicable to all weapons and disciplines, at least all the ones I've come across so far. So, perhaps some of these problems will seem familiar from your own sparring. You might have difficulty applying techniques in sparring. You know what you should be doing, but you just can't quite do it. Perhaps the situations that occur in sparring are quite different from the situations that occur when you're busy training or drilling techniques. I often find that drilling is a lovely, clean, sterile environment, and then it all goes to pot when sparring starts happening. Often, a common problem for me is my opponents don't give me the right stimulus to do what I want to do to them. They try and be awkward and uncooperative, and they make it difficult for me to hit them, and it sucks for me. It's probably what they should be doing. Do these problems seem familiar at all from your sparring? I suffer from all of these problems, and that's exactly why I've been looking into fundamental skills. I experience these problems, I've been experiencing them since I started fencing, but also very recently. Just in my sparring matches last week, I still wasn't quite getting the stimulus I wanted from my opponents. I didn't set things up properly to pull off the complex thing. Or I knew what I wanted to do, I just couldn't quite bring myself to do it. So these problems all occur for experienced fencers as well as beginners. And no matter what level you're at, we need to pay attention to the basics, to the fundamentals, so that the cool stuff will work. And for those of us here who are teachers, once we, as more experienced martial artists, find solutions to these problems, we then have to work out a good way to transmit these solutions to our students. So if we have all the answers, that's good for us. But we need to give our students the answers as well, and we need to find a good way of transmitting these solutions. Otherwise, they don't quite pick up the right bits of information. And hopefully, if we can transmit the solutions nice and swiftly and nice and easily, not only will we save our students the frustrations that we've felt, but also the injuries that we've sustained, trying to learn exactly how do you do this technique? Ow, not that way. So, over the last year and a half, this might sound a bit like heresy, but I've not really been reading the sources as often as I used to. In fact, I've been ignoring all the complex bits of the sources, been looking at the bits that are nice and fuzzy and generic and abstract, and I've been ignoring all the stuff which tells you, and if he does this, do that to him, but if he does that to you, you can do this on top of it to beat him, and it gets very complicated, and I can't do any of it under pressure. So I've been ignoring that. Put it to the side, I'll get to it later. Once I become able to do the basic stuff in the sequence. Once I can do the basics, I'll try the second step. Once I can do the second step, I'll try the third. So I've just been focusing on very simplest things, the most important core aspects. In Lichner's longsword we have the 17 Hauptstücke. I've been looking at maybe 5 of them. So I know there's plenty of core concepts I still have to look at. I'll get round to them when I feel I'm all right enough at the first few. So, how do we measure the success of a given technique, a given interpretation, I give an understanding of a concept. Success is subjective. The way that I measure success is by a form of validation. I want to validate everything I do. While it would be nice for me to say, that worked because I'm the teacher, it really doesn't work that way. So I try to validate everything that I do so that I'm happy enough with the fact it does in fact match the sources. It's got, as far as I'm concerned, the H in HEMA is important. But I want it to be effective, and I want it to be effective under pressure as well. It's not much use to me if I come across some guy who's massive, very muscly, and I just go, ah, shit, it doesn't work against you. I need to have my stuff work and to be able to rely on it. And I also want to be able to break it down and teach it to others. And if I can validate a technique well enough that I'm happy with it, then usually I understand it well enough that I can break it down and teach it to others. So by taking techniques and interpretations to their extreme and validating them as far as I can, usually that helps me become a better teacher for these techniques. So in the book, the Encased in Steel Anthology, Volume 1, which the instructors were given last night, because we like to be an ethical publisher, we want to support scholarship and the instructors as well as the fencers who win competitions. But in that book, there's an article by me entitled Validating What We Do in Martial Arts. And in that I present what I very grandly call the Academy of Historical Arts validation model for techniques. And that's the source, the reference, the citation. Very briefly, I could go into an awful lot of detail. After all, it's something like a 20-page article on validation. Very briefly, there are 5 tests we can use to measure the success of an interpretation of a technique. And you can use these tests for any technique in any discipline. Doesn't match the sources. If it says use the long edge, the true edge, the front edge, whatever it calls it, and you decide to use the flat, it's not right. If it says this is a descending cut, but you sort of wobble in from the side, it's not right. So first of all, does it match the sources? If yes, well done. Secondly, does it work in drilling? Well, if it matches the sources, but I can't make it work against a cooperative training partner, it's kind of rubbish. So the next step is, the first step, I have this theoretical idea of what I'm doing. The next step is making it work in a relatively cooperative, sterile, clean environment. Third step, okay, cool, I can make it work against a partner. Does it actually do anything? If I can't make it work in cutting or some kind of destructive test, be it seeing if my thrust with a rapier or a small sword can actually pierce a bottle or do I just knock the bottle over? Sometimes using breaking boards or whatever. So a quarter staff doesn't cut so very well, but it can break fairly well. Any kind of destructive tests are good, but does it actually transfer force? Does it actually do damage? If it doesn't, well, back to the drawing board. Work out the mechanics better. So, if it matches the sources, if I can make it work against a relatively cooperative opponent, if I can do damage with this set of mechanics, does it work when sparring locally, as in within your own club, with the people you know quite well? Can I make it work against an uncooperative opponent? That's fine, yes. So it's getting closer. I'm getting more happy and comfortable with my interpretation of something. But in the final test, does it work when sparring abroad? Not necessarily in a different country, just out with your comfort zone, out with your circle of common fencing partners. So for me, I'll go across to one of the other cities in Scotland, I'll go to meet one of the other clubs and I'll try it against them. Or when I come to one of these events, I'll try and use it here. I don't mind if I take more hits than usual. If I'm trying to validate something, and because I'm trying to do that, I take a few more hits than usual, that's fine, I'll live with that. If I manage to validate my technique, I'm happy with that result. I figure if it passes all of these 5 tests, it's probably a good representation of what the technique could have been. I'm not going to say what it's supposed to be, I won't know for certain, but if it meets these 5 tests, I'm happy enough with it. So this is how I validate my actions. This is how I define success. A successful technique will meet all 5 of these tests. We'll pass all 5 tests. So I've been working with the most basic techniques and concepts in an effort to pass these tests. Mainly working with just the Oberhal. Recently I've been working with the Zwerhal from the right, and I'm sticking with that for the moment. Let's not push things too far. And I think I've been able to validate my basics, at least as far as I've been able to test them. So I'm beginning to work in the slightly more complex actions, but still actions which are relatively complex. Relatively simple. I don't want to complicate things too much. So yes, the Oberhal, the Zornhal, I'm happy enough with that, but I'm not rushing ahead. I'm not rushing to move from just being able to do that properly to doing all of this cool stuff. Yes, it follows on from the basics, but it's a step too far. Some of my more complex techniques I'm able to pass some of the tests. The first 2 or 3 I can maybe make them work in drilling. I can usually make most stuff work in drilling. That's simple enough. When my opponent is helping me make it work, it's really hard to screw it up. And you know, when cutting things like milk bottles or trying to do some kind of destructive tests, I can manage this reasonably well with most techniques. I don't get the perfect level of success I want with it, with some of them, but you know, I'm working towards it. I'm still working towards being able to apply some of this stuff in sparring. You know, things like the Krumpal, it's lovely and simple in whichever version of it you read, you just say, and hit him in the hands. But much easier said than done. So I'm trying to make it work in sparring. What do I need to be able to do to validate them completely, to go all 5 steps through the process? Well, I need to improve the fundamental skills that are the foundations upon which these techniques are constructed. What is a fundamental skill? We should probably define this before we start talking about it much further. I would suggest that a skill is your ability to undertake a task, whatever the task is, and achieve it with some amount of success. If you can do a thing reasonably well, you probably have an amount of skill at that thing, or it is a skill upon which you can rely, more or less. It could be a technique. Something like an Oberhal is a skill. It is actually quite a complex skill to make a good Oberhal, and beginners find an Oberhal really difficult. People who are a bit more advanced think of it as a relatively simple thing, but there's a lot of things in there. So an Oberhal is a collection of skills. You've got to have the footwork, the distance, the timing, the striking mechanics, and your recovery at the end of it. It's not a good enough Oberhal if you go, yes, perfect, and then you get clocked in the head. There's all kinds of little skills within a bigger skill. So a fundamental skill is one of these things that cannot really be broken down any further. It would be a low-level component of a larger, more complex skill. So here, these would be the fundamental skills. That would be the skill which has several components. Are you familiar with the magic number 7 plus or minus 2? Some people? No? Yes? Okay. It's a theory proposed in the 50s by a chap called Miller. It's quite a long theory. I'm not going to bore you with the details, but in short, the average person of kind of average intelligence can keep 7 plus or minus 2 bits of information in memory at any given time. For a slightly brighter than average adult, 8. For quite an intelligent adult, 9. For someone who's a bit slower, maybe only 6. Quite slow, maybe 5. It's 6 plus or minus 2 for children kind of before they become teenagers, and it's 5 plus or minus 2 for infants. So actually we're not that far advanced from infants. We cannot rely on keeping a lot of things in memory. What about chunking? Have you heard of that? More people nodding. Good. As you become accustomed to linking certain pieces of information, certain bits of information, they no longer take individual bits in your memory. They no longer count as so many of the 7 plus or minus 2 bits. And instead they chunk together to form a single piece of information. So for example, a phone number. A phone number in Glasgow might be something like... It's not mine, don't call it. Well, if you want, it's fine. It doesn't bother me. That's a few numbers. That's 11 bits of information. If you want to add in the +44 for the country codes, that's more bits of information. But as you get used to putting it together, it chunks down. So it becomes 3 bits of information instead of 11. And then eventually I think that's this guy's number. So it becomes 2 bits of information, this guy's name and his number. So the more we can bring bits of information together and do them close to each other so they form an association, the more they chunk and the easier it becomes to be able to think more with a given technique. So do you see how this could apply to physical skills such as performing an Oberhau? There's a lot of fundamental skills. In the previous slide I listed, I think, 5 fundamental skills for the Oberhau, but that's already approaching the 7. So there's a lot of things to think about. When describing an Oberhau from the right shoulder, you might say, okay, left leg forward, sword at the right shoulder, and I want you to use a pull, push, step mechanic, striking with the long edge, at the head, stopping before you've swung too far, but keep your point on line. There's a lot of bits in here, and you can also add, you can keep adding little instructions that you as a coach think, oh yes, I should probably also say this, oh yes, that's also important. And it's very easy to overwhelm your students with too much information about something that is ridiculously simple for you. Because, oh, for me, I can do an Oberhau in my sleep, apparently sometimes do, oh well. So for me, an Oberhau is 1 bit of information. I do this. That's an Oberhau. Cool. For my newcomers, the Oberhau is, which foot is forward? Where do I put the sword? Okay, it's here. No, other foot forward. No, other left foot, that's the one. And then what they do is, this thing? Yeah, that's fine. So, there's a lot of bits of information for beginners, but as we get more used to it, we chunk it down, and an Oberhau becomes the technique. So most of us, after doing this for a while, we will think of the Oberhau just as something like that. But if we haven't paid enough attention to the fundamental skills, the component parts of this, then we're probably chunking too soon. And we have this idea, the Oberhau is this. But we might not have the correct coordination of which hand does what task first, exactly how to step behind it, exactly how to use the body to support the hit, the correct distance to use, the correct part of the sword with which to make contact. But we think, yeah, we can do the Oberhau, that's 1 bit of information. For fundamental skills, we need to unchunk for a little while. Yeah, I skipped ahead. Fine. So beginners have difficulty performing 1 big skill because they're still processing the individual bits. But an Oberhau is a skill that requires all the little bits to be successful. So for the Oberhau, it's something like judging the distance, or just doing it at the right time. Doing it at the right time is a really hard thing to do. You think, yes, I see an opportunity, and I'm too late. Or you just go in too early, and he goes, fine, that's really easy for me to parry. Seeing the opening into which to make the cut, much easier than it sounds. You're under pressure, someone like Arto's or Axel, they're bearing down on you, they're throwing their cuts, you're like, ah shit, just go away! There we go, that's my time. If 1 or more of the fundamental skills are lacking, then the success of the action will be compromised. If you do 1 of the bits wrong, the overall thing won't be as good as it could be. So, how do we identify the fundamental skills? Before we can train them, we should probably know what it is we're supposed to be training. I find that's usually a good way to go forward. So a simple situation that can apply to almost any discipline. Your opponent stands in some kind of point forward guard, with the sword roughly on the centre line, not really closing any of his openings. We see this a lot in sparring. People might just be lazy, they start off in a good guard and then it sort of drifts into the middle, or they just don't know what they're doing and they just put the sword forward and go, ha ha. So it could be something like the middle guard for the broadsword or sabre, it could be Fiore's posta breve, or just someone being a bit lazy. From a hands low, point forward guard of your own, so something like fluke for the longsword, or the outside or inside guard for the broadsword, or a tertia for rapier. You want to make a thrust to hit him in the head. What all fundamental skills do you need to do in order to make this action successful? So he's in a position, perhaps something like that, not really covering himself. You're in a position here yourself, hands low, point forward, and you want to stab him in the chest. What fundamental skills do you think we need to make this successful? Any ideas?
Know what to do with your feet.
Know what to do with your feet, very much so, that helps. Anything else?
The timing.
The timing also helps.
Judging the distance.
Very much so, yes.
The line of attack.
Line of attack, yes. A lot of people don't think about that. They just think, aha, I should thrust. Turns into double hits. That's one of the things that people really need to unchunk for a while and think about.
Make sure the opponent's blade is taken care of.
Yeah, closing the line of attack. Another way of phrasing the same thing. It's worth phrasing that in a few different ways because it needs to be driven home. So quite a few fundamental skills you might want to have in this action. So, you know, maybe he moves his blade into this position from somewhere else. Maybe his point is down and he moves his blade up, or he's been up here and then he's thinking, I'm going to do something else. And so he moves his blade into position from somewhere else. You can spot this the moment it occurs. That's useful. You maintain a distance whereby you can hit him with a single lunge or passing step. So you can go, oh, now's my time, good, in we go. Rather than going, ah, shit, come back. You have the speed to perform the action before he can react. It's no use saying, yes, now is my time. It's too slow. You have the necessary targeting skills to place your point exactly where it needs to be. If you want to stab him in the chest, but you end up, poking him in the arm, maybe it's still a hit, but it's the wrong hit, damn it. Train it better. You provide opposition against his blade with your own, covering the line of attack, making sure you're safe going in. You have to have the strength. Please read this as correct body mechanics, not necessarily massive muscles, just right body mechanics to drive the thrust home. So even just a weak kind of oh shit parry won't divert your thrust away from the target. So you have to be able to drive it home with the body behind it, and not just go ah and sort of flop into it. And after you hit, maybe you want to close further. One of the rapier texts, Fabrice possibly, I'm not really much of a rapierist, suggests that after you land your thrust, put it through him, close in, and then he can't cut you or do anything nasty with you at distance. So these are perhaps some of the fundamental skills that could be useful to the action of thrusting in that situation. There's probably a whole lot more fundamental skills in there. This is just a set of examples. And these can perhaps be broken up into following groups of skills. There's just a few groups in here. I already sort of separated them in the previous slide, but here we are. So situational skills, fundamental situational skills. What stimulus do you need before you can act successfully? Being able to identify the stimulus immediately as it occurs, or possibly even setting it up so that you know it's coming. If someone moves from here to there, and you want to thrust on this side of it, if they're standing here going, yeah, do you want to take that? That's probably the wrong time to fall into their trap. Whereas this person's just been a bit blasé, going and you catch them in the middle because you've read their timing, you've read their pattern, and you take advantage of them. This is good. Again, situational, what distance do you need to be at to perform the technique successfully? Being able to position yourself at this correct distance at the right time to perform the technique as soon as opening presents. So your opponent usually doesn't just stand there, and if they do just stand there, they deserve whatever happens next. They're usually maybe moving forward or playing with distance, moving around you. You have to maintain your distance, or rather maintain the distance that you want to maintain, and not let them bully you. You've got to know your abilities, your limits, and keep yourself at such a situation so that when the opportunity presents itself, you can just take advantage of it and the job is done. There are other situational skills, these are just a couple. Blade skills. Performing your own technique with the necessary blade mechanics to enter safely and effectively, to hit safely and effectively, and to exit safely and effectively. If you can't get in cleanly without being hit, you suck. If you can't hit very well, not good enough. If you can't exit safely, you're still dead. So you have to have the necessary blade mechanics to let you get in, hit well, and get back out. Be able to control his blade if required with your own blade or with your body or hand. You know, sword and buckler, you might use the buckler to bind him down so you can hit him in the head, straight out to 533. You know, with the small sword or the rapier, someone thrusts at you, you parry it to the side and stab him, whatever. Be able to control his blade. Just sort of letting his blade do what it wants to do and you go, is probably a bad idea. Be able to feel pressure in the bind if it occurs. Now if he's pressing a bit, or if he's moving up, or is actually withdrawing from your bind, be able to feel this and modify your plan on the fly is useful. React to whatever incoming stimulus or tactile feedback you get. These are blade skills. You could perhaps categorize these differently. This is just a very, again, brief set of categorizations to get you thinking. Body skills. Not giving the game away by telegraphing. If I want to hit from here, I might just do that. That's what Rauworth says, perhaps is a good cut. Just pivot and shoot in with opposition. If I go, I'm going to hit you now, that's not ideal. Unless you mean to do it, in which case it's perfect. Structuring your body to meet and defeat resistance. So that's perhaps not parrying with the weak of your weapon. It is perhaps getting your body behind the parry so that you can, resist. If you want to hit, it's not hitting like that, but there's nothing behind it. It's hitting well with the body behind it. Whether it's resistance coming from an incoming attack, or resistance, his parry, or just his body, you need to be able to meet and defeat resistance on your terms, preferably with structure, not raw strength. You need to have the physicality and athleticism necessary to perform the action quickly and effectively. Well, the art is about doing things technically and correctly and cleverly. If you don't have a certain amount of strength, you just can't do it right. If you don't have the right amount of speed, you just probably won't land anything. You have to have physicality and athleticism so that you can do the art and let the art shine. So generally, look at the different component parts of the action before it happens. So what stimulus do you need? How must you set up your desired action? What's the situation? All that jazz. While it happens, what all parts of the action must fall into place at the same time in order for this to be successful. And there's quite a lot of things that have to happen at the same time to ensure success. And then after it happens, what do you need to do to secure your longevity or to follow up after the first part of the technique if it requires multiple steps? So if you work out the before, the during, and the after, and not thinking so much about for, nach, indis, all that stuff, but just before the action, what must you be doing to ensure success? During the action, what all do you need to do to make sure the action is being successful? And afterwards, how do you ensure you don't get dead? So by thinking about the different parts and times of the action, you'll identify certain fundamental skills that all have to be present for a successful action. Does that make sense? Am I going too quickly or is this fine? Excellent. So, quick notes. With the best will in the world and with the best mechanics you can muster, it is unlikely that an attempt at a technique will be successful if you do it at the wrong time, or from the wrong distance, or if your opponent does not give you the correct stimulus for it. So, you might have the best interpretation of the whatever how, but if you do it at the wrong time, it's not going to hit. If you do it from the wrong distance, it's going to hit with the wrong part of the blade, or just miss. And if you need a certain amount of resistance from your opponent, but he's being too compliant, thinking that he's helping you, you're not getting the right stimulus, and so you can't do it correctly. One of the biggest problems with people doing things like depleting with the longsword, where against a bit of resistance you shoot round and cut them between their blade and their head, you need some resistance for that. If the person's just going, on you go, you can't really do it. Rubbish. At that point, you're better just blowing through and doing something else. But if they give you a bit of resistance, then you can work with that, take it, and just go boom, in the head. it's all right to abort your plan and do something else if your opponent doesn't give you the right opportunity. So you want to do depleting, but he's just going, on you go. Just smack him in the head and say, right, now give me more resistance. And when drilling a technique, failure is almost assured if your training partner does not give you the correct stimulus to let you train the correct action. So you really want to do that depleting, but your opponent's really weak and doesn't really understand the concept of closing his line properly. So you shoot him with your robot how, and you want to do the depleting, but he just goes tap thrust. And you can't do that successfully if he's not giving the right stimulus. If you know that that's the stimulus you're going to get, you need to change what you're doing. Maybe turn it into a croup how and hit him, or stay on his blade, wind down further and go in. If you want to do something, but you don't get the right stimulus, don't do it. Do something better. And this is also useful when you're thinking about your interpretations, especially for the instructors. You might have a good idea of how this should work, but you maybe can't make it work with your training partners, or your students are having difficulty making it work when drilling. They might just be getting the wrong stimulus from their training partner. Maybe the training partner is being too strong, or not strong enough, or perhaps holding the sword too high, or maybe it's too far out, or the hand's too far retracted. You're just not getting the right stimulus to do the thing properly. So the fundamentals have to be right for something to be successful. And if for any reason you cannot apply the right fundamental skill, or that skill cannot be present to enough quantity or quality, the overall skill is probably not going to be successful, and you might just have to abort and do something else. There's no shame in doing this sort of thing. It's much better to do the right thing at the right time than to try to do something cool and get stabbed.
If I may just, a quick note on my own experience coaching this exact problem of one of the people involved is not doing the correct thing, the other person to practice and change the strategy I've adopted for trying to approach that is to make sure I give both people in a drill something they're supposed to be trying to do right.
Yes.
And so if I can figure out something that works for the person who's supposed to be giving the stimulus, then both people have something to focus on doing right, and then the drill works better.
We could quite easily run a presentation or a roundtable discussion on how to set up the right stimulus during training sessions. And how to manufacture exercises so that everyone does the right thing at the right time, whether they want to or not. Which is difficult, but quite good fun to design such exercises. Don't want to go into too much detail about that because we don't have a lot of time, but yes, it's a fantastic thing to think about and to discuss. So, how do you train fundamental skills? Once you've identified them, you probably want to get better at them, so you need to train them. You have to work out how to practice them. It's no use merely identifying that they exist. Oh yeah, I should probably work on timing and distance. I'm off to the pub. We work in the timing and distance first, and then we go to the pub. That's the right time to do it. Aha. So, you need to work out how to train yourself to get better at in this case, identifying openings, so that you actually possess the skill and can deploy it in sparring. It's not good enough just to say, I need to get better at identifying openings. Okay, I saw an opening, yeah. I saw an opening, yeah. Job's good one. You go to sparring, you go, I don't see a thing. You need to train it. How do you train a fundamental skill? The books don't always tell you, especially looking at the longsword stuff. They say, and if he comes at you with an overhaul, do these several things that make you look really cool. But they don't tell you the detailed steps on how to do the first thing in the sequence. So we have to work this out ourselves. First rule, stop worrying about techniques and complicating things from the sources. Just ignore them. Books are lovely. Put them aside. Look at them later. Just accept that if you're having difficulty with the fundamental skills, such as identifying openings or working with the strong of your blade in such a fashion as to give you cover during an attack, whatever fundamental skill it is, if you're having difficulty, then you are doomed to fail with every technique until you improve this basic skill. If you don't understand distance, if you don't understand timing, you're pretty much fucked. You won't have much success other than with luck. So reduce your focus to this fundamental skill and this skill alone. It's cool if you learn something else in the process, and a good instructor can layer the teaching so that you may well learn some other stuff at the same time. But the overriding lesson must be that of the fundamental skill that you're trying to learn. If you try and spread your focus too much, you don't get very good at anything. But if you focus in and really home in on that one thing, you can actually learn it. You can become good at it, or better at the very least. So at the Drain event in Vienna a couple of years back, I gave a presentation on teaching models for HEMA instructors. And it's on YouTube. If you have a look for my name or for teaching models for HEMA, it'll come up. It's about an hour long. I think it's worth watching. I refer back to it when I forget stuff. But one of the things I talk about is the idea of working towards a primary outcome. I go into much more detail in the video, but I'm just going to summarize it here. But you need to decide on a primary outcome of the lesson. It could be something like learning to recognize openings and opportunities better, to become better at inserting yourself with an attack when you do see an opening, learning to close the line properly when you make a parry. It could be something ridiculously simple, like getting better at taking one of your hands off your longsword to use it for grappling or half swording or just parrying, gripping, whatever. It seems like a really, really easy thing. Just take your hand off the handle. It's not rocket science, but it's really difficult under pressure. Pick one skill to be your primary goal. Just one, don't be ambitious. You can maybe have secondary goals later if you're a good instructor and you know how to structure and layer your lessons and how to do skill developments and progressions and all that kind of stuff. That's fine, you can develop your lessons, and in the meanwhile you're working towards your primary goal and you have a couple of secondary outcomes and your students learn a ton of stuff without realizing it. It's nice, clever teaching, but just pick one thing to be your primary goal. Everything else is nice, but not important. Once you've decided upon your primary outcome for the lesson, everything you do in the lesson must be leading towards that primary goal. It's no use deciding we're going to look at taking the hands off the grip tonight, but let's start off with a cutting exercise. That's training something else entirely. That's training you to keep your hands on the grip. It's counterproductive. If an exercise does not really improve your abilities in terms of the primary goal, then leave it out. Ignore the exercise and instead spend your time doing something that will actually help you achieve the outcome. A lot of clubs have drills and exercises they like to do. It's just become part of the warm-up tradition, or we do this sort of thing just because we find it generally helpful. A lot of clubs have something like a footwork drill, where both partners try to maintain measure. Perhaps one person is the lead, and if they move forward, you move back. If they move backwards, you move forward. You just maintain measure. Not a bad drill. There's nothing wrong with that. But if your primary goal is to improve your ability to take your left hand off your longsword's hilt, then this exercise doesn't really help at all. You're training the wrong skill, which is maintaining distance rather than preparation for grappling. It's a different skill. And if you have one of these kind of default, okay, we're going to go and do a footwork drill now, it might just teach you the wrong thing. It might get people thinking about different things or reinforcing the wrong lesson. You always want to reinforce the right lesson, you never want to reinforce the wrong lesson. So let all the exercises during a lesson lead towards achieving this primary outcome, and you'll get better at the fundamental skill that you're focusing on. If you're kind of scatterbrained and a bit ADHD, you might have fun. You won't necessarily learn very much. But if you focus, you can really get in at the meat of the matter, and you can learn something. To be able to focus on a fundamental skill, you must become able to exclude anything more complicated. I'm talking about ignoring stuff quite a lot, which can be, a lot of people think that is fairly heretical, but to be able to focus on something very specific, you just have to ignore the rest of it. Focus on one of the trees in the forest. The rest of the trees are cool, they might be very interesting trees. You can look at them later. It's very easy to become distracted with trying to go too far, too fast, and to try to implement too many things at once. Just focus. But this is exactly why most interpretations fail. Because people are trying to do too much, they're being too ambitious, they're trying to go too far, too fast, trying to implement too many things at once without having achieved the necessary level of competency at the component fundamental skills. So people think, okay, we should work in the Tsonghua art. which is a lot of stuff. The somehow art sequence is he comes in with an overhaul, so he's got to be providing the right stimulus. You've got to be at the right distance to deal with it. You've got to parry, but you put in some kind of thrust. If he parries you, lift off, cut to the other side. If he parries you, do some more funky stuff. Or you make your somehow, and if he's really strong in the bind and you can't have success thrusting, start winding it in and do stuff there. Or if he's really powerful when he comes in with his overhaul and you're just not quite as successful as you want to be, slam into your depleting. There's a lot of things here. And so people say, right, we're going to look at the somehow art tonight. We're going to look at all these 7 or 8 steps and you're going to learn the somehow art. And they can't do their overhaul correctly. If they can't do the overhaul correctly, they cannot make the launching platform for whatever follows, and the training partner cannot provide the right stimulus because they don't know how to control their overhaul. They can't give you a weak overhaul. They can't give you one that merely contests the center line without dominating, or they can't give you one, they don't know how to dominate the center line. If you don't look at the fundamentals and you try to go too far and bite off more than you can chew, it'll all go wrong because the wrong stimulus will be in place, you'll be at the wrong distance, you'll do things at the wrong time, it'll just go all horribly wrong. So instead, step back from the books, put the books on the shelf and go, yes, they're pretty, we'll come to you later. Ignore what else you can do with the technique. Yeah, sure, instructors love the but what if question, but what if I do this? Then I'll smack you upside the head. Just focus on the one fundamental skill you want to develop, and this will give you the best chance of success. Does anyone disagree with that? Good, I'm right. Ah. So, skill development. Again, there are books this thick on the subject of skill development. A brief summary of this is to pick a primary outcome, ensure that all exercises lead towards developing the necessary skill to achieve this particular outcome, but start simple. Make it really, really simple. There's nothing wrong with being so ridiculously simple that people have difficulty with it. It's entirely possible to break down the overhaul into such simplicity that people go, it can't possibly be this simple. And they try to complicate it, and it all goes wrong. Most of the time during my lessons, I will be telling people, you're doing this wrong because you're making it too complicated. Just make it simple. Humans like to complicate things. We love to add more and more complexity. We find it very difficult to keep things ridiculously simple. But you've got to start simple. And just gradually, very slowly, build the complexity. So you might start off with the overhaul being simply the overhaul in mid-air. Can you hear the whoosh as it goes through the air? That's your challenge. Make a good whoosh. We don't need any partners yet. You're not trying to hit with anything. Just can you make a good overhaul? Okay, slowly build complexity. Okay, there's a guy in front of you. I want you to hit him on his temple on the mask. Not the cheek, not the top of the head, certainly not the ribs. It's an overhaul at 45 degrees. Hit him in the temple. Slowly build complexity. Add more complexity, slowly. Okay, he's now going to be moving backwards and forwards. You've got to maintain your distance, and when he gives you a signal or when the instructor shouts now, launch in, land your hit, but it's still got to whoosh and it's still got to hit at 45 degrees in the temple. Adding complexity. You can add complexity in different fashions. You can build up a lot of complexity in one direction to the point where people are really good at this skill. Then you can backtrack a little bit and take the complexity in this direction. So for example, if you're working out the timing and distance of throwing the overhaul as a Vorschlag, you can then say, okay, but what if he parries? Or what if he throws an attack to you and interrupts your pattern? So you can make the skill a bit more open. There's open and closed skills. A closed skill is something you can just do and repeat without really much external influence. An open skill has external influence. You have to be able to deal with confusion. So make it a bit more open. Add more chaos. Add more noise. Were any of you at my longsword lesson on Friday? Good, one of you. Shame on the rest of you. We were doing exactly this. We started off looking at defending yourself by turning the sword from one side to the other without doing anything complex. Just put the sword in the way. And people found that difficult because it was too simple. People got used to that, so we started building more complexity. Started adding in people attacking to different openings, and you had to maybe vary the height of the attack. We started adding a bit more footwork moving around the place, so you're no longer just standing in on the same spot and doing this. You've got to move around. Maybe working with the wrong leg forward. All of a sudden we're looking at different mechanical skills. Add more chaos, more noise. And suddenly, at the end of the lesson, although everything is working towards this one primary outcome, it looks suspiciously like sparring because you've made it so complex, maybe so much of an open skill, you've added so much chaos and noise, that people are not just doing one basic thing, but you've added lots to it, and people are still training that one fundamental thing, but with lots of extra noise, and they're bridging the gap between drilling and sparring. If you're interested in discussing the issue of skill development and coaching methodologies, I'm quite happy to be invited to your event to teach about instructor training. If you want to talk to me later about this, I'll be here down there hitting people with swords, or chatting about swords, one of the two. I'll be at dinner later. If you want to talk to me about coaching methodologies, come and talk to me. I'm more than happy to talk about this. I can spend hours talking about this. So, some case studies with my own practice. Still got a bit of time, good. So about a year and a half ago, I thought I could do fueling, the skill of fueling, or feeling, fairly well. And I've got a third dan black belt in karate after 14 years of study. Year or two of modern fencing, and I've been doing historical fencing for about 7 years. I thought that with this experience I had a reasonably good idea of how to feel stuff. But I could never quite perform my winding actions in time during sparring. I couldn't quite decide just how hard or soft my opponent was in the bind. It's like, okay, he's a bit stronger than me, that means I should probably do this thing. Ah, shit, it's too late, he stabbed me. It's like, I just couldn't choose the appropriate response, the winding action, before he had changed the situation and had done something else. So I went back to the drawing board and reassessed my understanding of what the skill of feeling actually required of me. Who can feel? We can all feel something. I mean, this feels like a relatively solid object. This feels kind of light. You know, we can feel things. But do we actually perceive what we feel? There's a difference between sensing and perceiving. You sense everything that your senses can notice. If there are smells in the air, you smell them. If there's something happening, you probably do see it. You might not perceive it and understand what you have just sensed. A common example is you look at people in the finals in a competition, and you're like, what the fuck happened? Stuff happened. What was it? And the judges are going, I think I saw this. Yes, fine. Judges are people who have learned to perceive what they see better than the average practitioner. At least you hope so. You hope so very much. And usually the judges invited to judge in the finals are those judges who are better at the perception than the other judges. It's no shame to not have achieved quite as high a level. It's just that for something like a really fast-paced finals in whatever weapon, you want the people who can perceive their sensory input the best. So we can all feel, but how intelligently can we feel? So I could theorize quite well about the concept of feeling. You know, if he's stronger than you are, do this. If he's not as strong as you are, do that. Really simple on paper. But I wasn't able to react on a neural level. My consciousness had to get involved to make the decision, which took too long. Therefore, I had to find some way of bypassing thinking about it and just let my muscle memory, which is the next step after chunking, react directly to the tactile feedback I was getting at this neural level. So when I began to look into Lichtner's 5 words, just 5 words, they contain the entire art of fencing. I do a very good class in Lichtner's 5 words. I can teach you the entire art of fencing in 2 hours. You won't learn it very well, but I can teach you the entire art of fencing. But when I was looking into this, it all began to take a much better shape for me, and the concept of windings as simply moving to place your strong on his weak on one side of your body or another, just somewhere in space, you put your strong in his weak, really opened my eyes. By simplifying the decision, I'm no longer thinking, how hard is he? He's a bit stronger than I am, so I should probably wind round and try and stab him. I just go, okay, my strong test weak, oh, it's on hard, cool. Or, shit, my strong test weak, oh, deploy him, awesome. Simplifying the decision-making process and just following the tactile feedback, I could do my winding action so much faster. So, not as fast as they need to be against some people. I very rarely wind up and stab Axel in the face. I'd really love to. But they are improving. So now sometimes with some of my students in sparring, they're just a little bit too hesitant, or they're just a bit too slow off the mark, and I just go, yep, there we are, and in we go. I can pull off things like the Sonhart, the Depleeren, the Mutieren in sparring, and I love doing that. I can do outside windings like the outer taking, the User and Nim. If I'm thinking about it, I'm kind of preparing myself to follow the tactile feedback. But by working on my fundamental skill of fueling, my perception of feeling, I got better at doing a whole ton of stuff. I still need more work on it. I'm not perfect yet, but I'm working there. So a major part of this training involves the Sprechfenster. The Sprechfenster is a position really wherever you have bound with your opponent. However you manage to bind, you're now in the Sprechfenster, the speaking window, because when the blades are touching, you have this window to have a conversation with your opponent. And they might tell you nice things, like, I'm open, and you go, yes, I love you. Or they might tell you nasty things like, I'm going to hit you in the head, and you're like, shit. I've worked with an incredibly simple, rather contrived exercise that's unlikely ever to happen in sparring. It's a fun little game, but it's not like sparring in the slightest. But after I do the skill developments and the skill progressions on it, if I have learning to feel as my primary outcome, after 2 hours of session, this exercise and its developments will have laid the foundations for a much better understanding and performance of fueling in fencing situation. And I've had quite a lot of students, after doing this session with me, go into sparring and pull off really cool looking winding actions. They just control the other person's blade, they put the point in, they go, shit, how did I manage that? Because they did it at the right time, because they knew when to do it, because they just worked on their fundamental skill of feeling. So I picked just one exercise, one single exercise to train a fundamental skill, worked with it for quite a long time, worked out how to add complexity to build it in the direction I wanted to bridge the gap between drilling and sparring. And once I was able to handle it, just added more and more complexity. I have enough iterations and variations of exercise to fill even a 3-hour lesson with nothing other than games about feeling. An exercise designed to teach the skill of feeling pressure. And now, I'm getting better at fueling, and so my winding actions and that sort of thing are improving a lot. With the longsword, I'm getting better with feeling and winding in things like sword and buckler. And actually, I've done some quite cool winding actions with the broadsword this weekend, with the synthetics no less, with the rolling synthetics. Pulled up a few nice winding actions around the weak of my opponent's blade, just because I was like, I know what's happening. Yes! I guessed right. I felt right. I perceived correctly. That's one case study. I've just been putting the books at the side. I know what Ringex says about the Sprechfenster. Not very much. If he leaves the bind, hit him in the head. Cheers. That's helpful. I know what the books say, so I don't have to look for answers. Put the books down, work on the really stupidly simple fundamental skills, and build complexity. Another case study, last one, sorry. Bleiben, remaining in the blade. I then realised that even though I was getting better at fueling, that wasn't actually the lowest level fundamental skill for winding. You can't really wind if you're not on the opponent's blade. You can't wind against his blade if his blade's not there. So I didn't actually have the self-control and the self-discipline to remain on my opponent's blade, rather than lifting off to make another attack or hastening to parry. It's really tempting when you've got someone. I don't know if you know Mark Wilkie, but he's my nemesis in Scotland. He's a really skillful fencer, and we've been beating each other for the last few years and forcing each other to get better. But when he's coming down at you and he's going, "I'm going to fuck you up," and you parry that first one, and you're like, "Yes, I'm safe now. Oh, I want to be over here now." It's really difficult to just stay on his blade and go, "I'm not going to parry that. I really want to parry that. I'm just going to stay here." It takes a lot of discipline, rather than just letting yourself flinch instinctively. So I realised that in order to get better at winding, I had to get better at staying on my opponent's blade, which is the concept of Bleiben according to Meyer. It's in there in Ringek and the Suda von Danzig if you read between the lines a little bit. While it's very explicit in Meyer, it is very much implicit and mentioned once or twice in passing. So it is in there. So I don't feel too bad for reading Meyer.
Well, you shouldn't.
But how could you train the skill of Bleiben? Bear in mind, with any weapon, there are reasons to remain on your opponent's blade. How can you teach the skill of remaining on someone's blade? Any ideas?
Jake actually tie their blades together.
Tie the blades together, okay. Make it impossible to separate.
So you get used to how it feels when you're there.
Yes. Set up a situation, show what it feels like, and then people are more likely to achieve that same feeling once they know what it should feel like. That's one good teaching method. Any other ideas? How can you teach someone to remain on the blade? Sounds ridiculously simple, but how would you teach that? How do you teach? Don't do anything.
Reward it.
Sorry?
Reward it.
Reward it. How? Throw chocolates at them. Yes. Positive reinforcement. Well done. You stayed in the blades. You get a point. Chocolates. Whatever. Any other ideas? Okay. Sorry?
Punish not doing it.
Punish not doing it.
Yeah.
So instead of throwing a chocolate, throw a brick. Yes, okay. My solution was simple. When sparring, I just tried to remain on my opponent's blade. I didn't worry about landing hits, and I didn't worry if I received more hits than usual. I got hit significantly more than usual because I wasn't parrying. It's like, I should probably have parried that. Oh well. I just tried to remain on my opponent's sword for, at first, just a second. So here I parry, and yeah, now I can do other stuff. And if I wanted to, because I was too late to parry, I would just scuttle backwards and take myself out of danger. So I got really quick at scuttling. But then, okay, I can do that for just a second. What about a second and a half? Just that little bit longer? Too late, I need to do something now, okay? 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and just gradually increasing my own self-control and my own self-discipline to be able just to remain on his blade if I want to do so. Don't always want to do so. When someone's coming in with a flurry of Sverhal, you just want to go, and you're not going to hit me in the head. No, my turn, boom. But sometimes someone comes in like that, they maybe step too far, or in one of these single-handed weapons, small sword, rapier, broadsword, whatever, they lunge in, and they just go that little bit too far, and they go, ah, shit, got to recover. You can remain on their blade and take advantage of it. Or people who only know how to make one attack in a sequence. They can't go 1, 2. They just go 1, 1, 1. And with them, because they have to spend a lot of motion going and recovering, you can remain on their blade for just a second, maybe follow up and do whatever. So, I may have taken more hits and perhaps I lost more fights, but I improved at the fundamental skill, and now I'm better able to play with blade contact and blade control during sparring. So, yes, it sucked, it hurt, got bruises, but I got better at the fundamental skill. So once I got better at remaining on his blade and having a blade against which to wind, and as I got better at learning to perceive my sense of feeling, use feeling intelligently, I became better at winding. Still not perfect. With some winding actions, I can pass maybe 3 steps of the validation model. Bit ropey in the 4th, but I'm getting there. Certainly nowhere near the 5th. But previously, it just really wasn't working even in drilling. So I've gone from only passing 1 step up to passing 3 steps. It's an improvement because I focused on a fundamental skill rather than trying to get better at winding. Come on. So, to conclude, a skill is your ability to undertake a task and achieve it with some amount of success. Performing a competent Oberhau can be a skill. Performing a good lunge is a skill with lots of little steps and bits. Performing a successful overhead parry is a skill with a lot of little bits and fundamental skills. A fundamental skill is a skill that cannot really be broken down much further. It would be a low-level component part of a larger, more complex skill. So a skill, such as a competent Oberhau, has many component parts, many fundamental skills that are required in order to achieve success. To improve your performance in sparring, to improve your interpretations, or just to make your interpretations damn well work, identify the fundamental skills that are required to achieve success. Once you've identified them, you can then work on them and train them. Make these your primary outcomes for training sessions and focus on training these fundamental skills. By concentrating on the basic things and using the appropriate skill development methods in your coaching, you will become a better fencer and you'll become more able to perform complex actions under pressure. And all you have to do is just stop reading the damn books, put them aside, and focus on one little thing and get better at it. Once you get better at several little things, pick up the book. And you'll find, oh, that's really simple, it's really obvious now, I should have read it that way at first. And you can understand so much more in the books, be they the medieval stuff or the early modern stuff. You know, after looking at some of the fundamental skills of cutting with opposition and the leg mechanics of lunging and recovering, looking at Rauworth or Angelo made so much more sense. Because previously I was trying to do something without having the fundamentals in place. When I started doing broadsword, actually, I screwed up my wrist. I did broadsword wrong. And then I looked at the fundamental skills of how to cut without fucking up your wrist, and my wrist got better. Yay! So, those were my conclusions. Thank you for listening to the presentation. Does anyone have any questions about this material? Yes?
So, when you train the people in your club and you want to teach them, say, I don't know, Fühlen, okay, you said you can do a 2-3 hour session just on Fühlen, but so in the next session, do you do something else? Like, do you mix it up, or do you keep training Fühlen for 3 weeks and do nothing else? How do you do that?
I take the idea of primary outcomes to a more complex level, and so I build a curriculum of lessons. And so my curriculum has a primary outcome with some secondary outcomes, and each lesson has a primary outcome with some secondary outcomes. And I make sure that each lesson builds on the previous lesson in the curriculum. So I might not necessarily do 2 lessons on Fühlen, but after the lesson on Fühlen, the next one will involve perception of feeling as one of the secondary outcomes as I bump something else up to primary focus.
Okay.
How do you approach sort of the introductory level of things? Like I bring in a person who's never held a sword before, and like I could spend the entire day talking about footwork, they're not going to come back, I have to do something else. So how do you look at something like that with this model?
I keep in mind the magic number 7 plus or minus 2.
Okay.
I don't give them too many bits of information, which means they will not do it properly. If I only give someone 7 bits of information about, you know, how to make a lunge with a broadsword, or how to do an Oberhau, it's not enough information, they won't be able to do it right. But if they can follow the 7 bits of information and start chunking that down, I can then add complexity at a later stage.
Right.
So I'll give people the rough shape of the thing, and I'm happy enough with that. I do my very best not to overcomplicate matters and give too much information. Just give them the shape of the thing, let them try it out, and then later on I can also say to them, you know why you're having difficulty with this thing? It's because you were missing this bit of information, but now I'm going to tell you this, we're going to work in this a little bit, and they'll go, oh, this makes it so much easier, cheers! And they feel happier about learning an additional piece of the puzzle, just bit by bit. Okay. Okay, in that case, I know that Maxime has a presentation to give. I took less time than Matt, so thank you very much for coming. If you want to chat to me later, please feel free. I'm going to be heading down there if you want to stab me or anything, but Maxime has a very interesting thing to talk about, so you should also listen to him. Cheers.
Thank you.